interesting, I think.
Okay.
Okay, we are now recording here. I'm going to maximize you guys, and I'm just going to double check one more time to make sure we're going. I'm going to put this in the corner here. And we're rolling here, guys, so, I think we can, I'll kind of get started here with our webinar here. How did you guys find the readings? I mean, there was a lot of reading to do. I know this is going to be recorded, and the professor will be the first thing we read, but did you guys have problems making it through all the reading? It took me a long time to read all that stuff, but it was really interesting stuff. Like, I loved the content is just amazing. It was just a lot of reading. It took me a long time to do it, but it was just, I think every article was just I thought was really fascinating. I really enjoyed it all.
Yeah, the readings are really good. It did take a long time. It took a few days, but I was just in the assessments course. I don't know if you guys were in that one prior to this.
Yeah.
I feel like that one had more reading than this. So I think I'm getting used to like all the readings, especially like in a short period of time, 8 weeks. But I found the outer articles very interesting. I mean, I was just reading it and couldn't stop, once I started. So it did take a few days, but printed everything out like you guys and highlighted it. That was the best method for me.
Yeah.
I thought it was, I started with reading the book, the first 60 pages of that book. And that was an easy read. So like, okay, that gave me the confidence to do the smaller articles because they weren't as long, but the content is heavy too, right? So like I was like, man, like the videos, especially the one by Dr. Helms, that would have benefited me to watch that video before I read about her theory, because like the six pieces was broken down so well in the video. And when I was reading it, I wasn't exactly sure what I was trying to follow, but the examples weren't as clear as in the actual video of hers. But I like the content. I'm like, like, whoa, like it's this is a new course for me for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Like,
even just working on the last case study, in a lot of the other classes I've taken where you have to do a project. And, just because we have this is my 6th or 7th course program, and I can just type out, just pound out an essay or pound out a PowerPoint presentation. It's just, a lot of it is automatic, but there's nothing automatic about this whatsoever. I have to really stop and really consider and really think, and there's no BSing any of this. I have to. So the first case study took me a long time to do. It was a really time-consuming project, but it was really worthwhile. Absolutely. I don't know.
And the readings. I find the readings are very a lot of them are very dense too, because they're so academic, and they've got many references to each other and also to literature that I may or might not have read in the past. So I'm trying to rack my brain, like, have I come across this before? But it's very dense. I found, especially not the last 3 readings for this discussion, but the ones for the case studies, when every single sentence there's a reference to.
Right.
They make a point, and then they reference it with 3 articles or 3 names. So it's it's very dense, and I mean it's great, but I think that also takes a bit more time to get through. It's good. It reminds me of a history course, actually.
Right. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go. You're fine.
Okay, I'm just going to kind of work off the, I want to kind of work off the group webinar, the questions here, and then we can, if there's any directions you guys want to take this, please go ahead, because it's, All right, so our first question is, how do the articles define whiteness and white supremacy? I don't know if you guys, if anybody wants to jump in with that.
I'll take that one.
Okay.
So, my background, I'm a white female, and I thought we were considered ethnic whites. Is that what she calls it in the chapter book?
Irish and Jewish and.
Yes, we were Irish and Italian, and my grandparents were both first generation out of the 4 of them Americans. So I was like, I didn't think this touched me at all, and was shocked. As white supremacy to me was. The people like the KKK and people like that. I had no idea. I'm shocked at my ignorance of it. But it defines white supremacy as, actually wrote it down, I think. But what white supremacy actually is, it was in that video interview, right? I took hand notes.
Matthias also gives an interview too in one of her papers in the
okay. Well, I
yeah.
thought the definition of overarching institutional and systemic processes of white superiorization, particularly in education in our case, which we're reading, that was in the digital storytelling article, and I thought that kind of like embodied a good example of what white supremacy is. But it was not at all what I thought it was coming into this course.
Oh, sure. Well, because the term itself, actually, I mean, you know, not knowing anything about like the terminology, the term, that's what it always meant, white supremacy, the KKK type of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to tackle the how do they define whiteness? It's kind of a new term too for me. Yeah, whiteness.
Does anybody else want to go, or should I?
I thought that D'Angelo did a very thorough job of it.
Even though they oh, I see it. White fragility.
White fragility.
Yes.
On page 56. I mean, they're quoting Frankenberg, but they're quoting him. You guys can see the smaller, like 10-point font. So Frankenberg describes it as whiteness is a location of structural advantage of race privilege. Second, it's a standpoint, a place from which white people look at ourselves, at others, and a society. Third, whiteness refers to a set of cultural practices that are usually unmarked and unnamed, and which other whiteness theorists talk about, like that color blindness, not being able to that it's, whiteness can be invisible right. And colorblind, so it's assumed as a norm, assumed as a what's the word, like common sense or as objectivity, which I think they're referring to in that third part.
Can I dovetail onto what you're saying here, Sarah?
Sure.
One thing, there was one article that was really awesome, gave a pretty good definition. It was a really strange article. It was the one by with all the space references, the space metaphors.
Oh yeah,
the defining.
Like, it was really weird. Like the first, when I read that the first time, I was like, "What is?" You know, I just couldn't understand a lot of the vocabulary words and the one of the definitions he gave. Like, if you think about space. Like, all the area's space is, like, dark and black, and it just is, like, this expansive, like, being, this big thing of, like, and it's all, like, this dark color, and he inverts it. He says, okay, whiteness is like space, but white. It's just all-encompassing everything, and everything you see in there is white. Everything else is, like, living in this universe of white. That's what I took away from it. And so I thought it kind of gave a good definition. It's like whiteness is just like you said, like the controlling or the system, the supremacy, but it's just like everywhere, you know.
And like the white hole, right?
Right.
Like how moral laws disintegrate and the Herrenbach justice. I thought that was a really cool article too.
At first I was reading, I was like, yeah, where is this going here? You know, like, come on. This is like the fourth article I've read, my eyes are already starting to hurt. I'm like, where is this going? But I thought it was really interesting. And good analogy, I thought.
Yeah. Well, and I also agree. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Shamina.
Sorry. In that article, the writer, they also articulate like the other three theories that they say in whiteness studies, that it's been defined by the different tropes. So one of them, just to recap, one of them was whiteness travels through, like traveling through.
Yes.
Traveling definition. One of them is that it's like multiple theories of whiteness, and then the other one was like a singularity of whiteness. Sorry, I'm trying to refresh my memory about that article.
Sarah, do you mind if I go back to Chimita? What were you gonna say, Chimita?
No, I was saying that. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Yeah. Okay. I was saying that I agree with what you guys were saying. I don't have all of the articles printed out now that I realized it. Just like 4 of them out of all of them. But I definitely agree, and I just think that one of the points it's important to bring up is that another part of white supremacy is just, you know, the subconscious part of it too, is not realizing, you know, the white privilege that, you know, whites have. It feels weird to say whites, but it's true. Like, I'm not talking at you guys, but it's true. So, you know, just living in a society, in a world where white privilege is so prevalent, and you may not realize, you know, how your privilege has gotten you to where you are, and just on an everyday basis, you know, coming from my perspective, being an African-American woman, you know, there's a lot more that I can see from my lens. So just reading the articles, a lot of it is like, okay, it's stuff that I know about because not only have I lived it and experienced it, but also because I've studied it in school, and just, you know, having, you know, being around. I grew up in Oakland, California, which is extremely diverse. So I agree with what a lot of the, you know, articles stated as well. But I think one of the important pieces that I realize is that, you know, a lot of white, you know, women and men don't even realize what white supremacy is, and what their white privilege means, and how it, you know, relates to them on an everyday basis. I just thought that was very interesting.
Well, that's what, and one of the things that was really interesting from those articles, that like they said that a lot of the teachers, like the teacher, like teacher students, they live in like kind of a bubble, and it's very difficult for them to process these new thoughts and new like ideas, because they just have not encountered anything, and they just don't see the world like that at all, and so it's very difficult for them to kind of come out of that bubble and relate to their students, you know, especially in like when they have diverse students, you know. So that's
that
part
was
of the
my
problem,
biggest takeaway of the of all the readings, like over that we started so far, but especially in this module, was that it's not learning about the marginalized groups, but it's learning about like self-awareness of and that was like but I think like, and did you all read the book the Waking Up White, how even like everything, you know, like the way my grandparents were raised and how that's affected me, like the benefits I've so the takeaway is I have so much to learn for me, and that it's learning about whiteness and how and the emotional learning of that too, not just the intellectual, and just how deep it runs. Like that's and how that can benefit, like as a teacher, you know, having to change our curriculum for that.
One really interesting analogy, I don't know if you guys are sports fans at all, that I think I might have read somewhere or heard somewhere, is about white privileges, that it's like being on third base and getting there like thinking you hit a triple, but you really didn't hit a triple. I mean, you got like a single and you got like moved along somehow, but you really believe standing on third base, you know, kind of like our president, he really thinks, you know, I'm sorry not to bitch about the president here, but like thinking that he, you know, truly on his own merit standing on third base hit a triple, but there's a lot of things that help him along the way, you know, to get there, and he doesn't realize that at all. Like, just totally oblivious, or may not know.
So, I can feel that.
I'm gonna kind of move this along, unless anything wants to add. I want to kind of, you know, move this along here. The what is white fragility, and how is the term useful in understanding white teachers' perceptions? Well, let's just start with the definition. What is white fragility? I don't know if anybody wants to jump in. Maybe.
Get my readings up.
Maybe.
I turn my pages.
I've got a definition here on that article, White Fragility, on page 57 at the top. It's under triggers, but I think it's I thought this, actually I highlighted this a lot because I thought this was really well defined. It was really intelligent. So they've got, it says on page 57, white fragility triggers. It says, white fragility is a state in which even a minimum amount of racial becomes intolerable, triggering a range of defensive moves. These moves include the outward display of emotions such as anger, fear, and guilt, and behaviors such as argumentation, silence, and leaving the stress-inducing situation that goes on. But I thought when it gets to the bullet points, like it's brilliant.
Right,
like
right.
the way like they have really like I don't know if it's psychoanalytic, but like they've really in my mind yeah, it's very kind
It
of
breaks it down
psychoanalytic,
nicely,
I guess.
yeah.
like but it's so like they covered everything. I don't know anything they didn't
Yes.
cover. I love how they've just laid it out in like simple bullet points. Like every time a white person gets upset about race, and then why in the brackets. So like a challenge to objectivity, a challenge to white racial codes, a challenge to white racial expectations, needs for entitlement to racial comfort, and they go on through. I think they like cover everything that is involved in white fragility whenever race comes up, or whenever when a white person feels challenged by statement or by racism or recognizing racism or whatever. Who is it? Yeah, D'Angelo. Like they got it all covered here.
Yes.
And I just thought it was really smart, the way that they've really spelled it out. Anyway.
Yeah, it was all encompassing. I like the example that in the Check Yourself Before You Wreck Yourself article, when she was talking about in Colorado, they were having a meeting for the children to, well, let me find it. I didn't explain it very well. My note says, where Haley's unprepared to deal with her own white emotions.
Yeah. This is our first day of teaching at an urban school.
Yes.
And the first thing they said was, like, it's a diverse student base, and so she's white, and they first thing they did was, okay, another nice white lady coming in here, and totally threw her off her game, and and she had not expected that would be the first thing they would think about, is that like a student full of and that just like totally threw off her game, and she wasn't expecting that, and it kind of leads back into this idea of not being prepared for teaching, because not reflecting well enough, let's put it like that, on her own, not being comfortable with her own whiteness. And that's how you say it. And before starting to teach, and just coming in there,
not being comfortable with being the other, suddenly being the other.
Right.
If she hasn't experienced that before, she's been in a sheltered little bubble. Where it's, I mean, obviously, like from my perspective, I'm a white woman I've been living in Asia for 16 years, and the first time I confronted being other was living in Japan, and I can't say it was reverse racism because I don't like that term, because it's not dimensions of any prejudice for me as a white person. My first experience actually like confronting that otherness was living in a very small town in Japan, not understanding the language, not being treated as a citizen, or basically being moved out of that racial comfort that white people in a white supremacist society enjoy. So that was very educational for me. And I think that, yeah, for sure, if you are if the first time that you're actually experiencing that otherness is in a classroom with children, then that's really doing a disservice to the kids of that class. Like, that's not fair to the kids. Like, it shouldn't be I mean, obviously teachers are always learning, but that shouldn't be your first educational experience of being other, or understanding whiteness, or understanding your race. So I don't know, I'm rambling a bit, but
no. Did they train you for that? Did they give you any training for that?
For me?
In Japan? Yeah, for Japan, when you were in Japan. Like, did they train you beforehand?
I was talking about the girl in the articles. Maybe I was deflecting.
But I think you're kind of referencing back to yourself being in Japan for the first time.
My first teaching job was all of my children, none of my students were white at all. And the school secretary, she was an older woman, and she thought I was of the attitude like, oh, I'm going to come save everybody in my classroom. And she made it clear that she thought that, which I in like not the first day of school, but after we got to know each other, I appreciated that from her. Like she's not, there's a I wasn't looking through the correct lens, and she kind of called me out on that. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And thankfully, the other teachers and the parents, we formed relationships, so it made it more positive than it could have been. But it was pretty, like, I cringe looking back at how I was so unaware, just like, even like I became more aware, but not to the point where I knew what white supremacy was until I read the study. So it's kind of shocking. I wonder what impression I left on those children. Like that's kind of difficult to think, because I mean, like I did care for them and did my best, but I didn't think I was trying to save them, but I definitely wasn't looking at them by seeing the discrepancies that I faced from them, like the privilege I faced compared to them.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. It wasn't, one like that, but can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, loud and clear.
It gets so quiet when we talk. It's like
you can't tell. When I moved to the Middle East, and I think it had less to do with race and more to do with religion and culture, because going over there, they're Muslim. Everything is very structured. It's very conservative compared to living in the United States. So just being out there was a culture shock. But we did have an orientation that was somewhat helpful, a little bit. It was like, oh, okay, these are the expectations. Don't do this in public. But it's nothing like until you actually go into the classroom and you start teaching the students and experience it yourself. But I think just coming from, again, the background that I came from, I was more open to, learning about a different religion, learning about a different culture than myself, even a different ethnicity. And being in that environment, I think helped a lot. And I had no choice but to stay there, because once you make that commitment, you're way over there. Like some of you guys are now in this foreign country. It's not easy to pick up and get on a plane and say, okay, I'm just going home. Like that's a 17-hour ride and a lot of money. So I totally understand, from that point of view. How it can be, although I still think it was different because we're all minorities in some aspect, especially, in some of the readings it was describing, I think it was the one about the Trayvon Martin one, about how Arabs are, targeted at airports, and a lot of the times the names that they call, they're the ones that are, have to be stepped to the side. And my brother has a Muslim name. So, he faces the same thing as well. So in some ways we could relate. And I have attended like a predominantly white institution. Actually, that's what I wrote my thesis on, in that experience and what it was like. And it was in California, in a very affluent neighborhood area called Moraga, California. And I think because I had that experience before, although I was a minority in that situation, I knew, how to handle it. So it's a little bit different, I think, when you're coming as a minority, because you're so used to being that other. It's great because we're living in a white America. So it's not like if it was a black America, if the roles were reversed, I think it would be a little bit different.
Have you guys ever seen the movie Malcolm X before? There's a really great scene from that movie where he goes on he goes to Mecca for the first time. And and having been in America, just only been in America, and his how whites and blacks at that time is in the 60s, and he goes to Mecca and everybody's praying together, and it's all these people from all these different races in there, all under the same idea of them being all Muslims, and all he said he's praying side by side with all people from all over the Middle East, and he said it was kind of a feeling of togetherness with all these people, even though it was nice to step outside of America and kind of be in a different I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it's really interesting.
Yeah, that is.
Long time ago, though. Yeah.
I'm gonna move. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just saying it's a good reference.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I'm gonna move this along here a little bit here. What is white racial identity development?
Oh yeah, that was that psychological.
Helms, right?
That was the article someone. Yeah.
Some steps.
That's really interesting too. Sorry, I don't want to overtalk
No, you're
like
good.
my
Go ahead.
time or anything, but or brag about the courses I used to take. It's just
Right.
like, but I thought it was really interesting because I got my degree, like I graduated in 2003. And so it's quite a long time ago, and the courses that I took in history and women's studies and all that, we studied race and anti-racist theory, but they didn't go into, they didn't address like the psychology of it, which I thought was anyway. So yeah, this that actually opened my mind a bit. I really like. I thought it was very helpful to read through those stages and transformations.
Yeah.
One of the
That
interesting.
doesn't answer the question at all, but
No.
it's just like, it's just a comment.
Did you say the white racial identity theory? Is that?
Yeah, that I think. Yeah, it says white racial identity development. I think that's the white racial identity is the 6 steps. I think. Am I right? I don't know.
I'm sorry,
But
I couldn't hear you. That.
I thought it was the white racial identity development is the like the 6 steps. I don't know if they're steps.
Okay,
they
yes.
call them statuses.
Yeah.
But
Dr. Helms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
people start off.
I thought that was fascinating too. Sorry.
Right.
And I just learned a lot reading that.
Yeah, no.
It was, she did the video, and the article
Right.
was, there's an article that preceded it back in the first module.
Yeah, I'm trying to look back and find it. Oh, it's like the flat profile and all that. I think there's a couple articles actually to do with it, because there was that talking about race, learning about racism,
It was
the
the one
application
with
of racial
the
identity
research.
development theory.
The
There's a
research
couple.
one.
Yeah.
By Helms. It was the relationship between racism and racial identity for white Americans, a profile analysis, is the one that I had in mind.
Oh,
The
the
very
Carter,
first
Helms, and Juby. Yeah.
one. Yes. And
Yeah,
then
that
that's
one
been
was
referenced
really-
a lot, though, in the other articles that we read in the
Yeah.
second and third parts of the module.
Yeah, so they have, what are the stages again?
There's 6 of them.
Yeah, I'm trying to find
Contact,
it.
disintegration, reintegration,
Yeah.
pseudo-independence,
Pseudo-independence,
emotion immersion, and autonomy.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
I thought it was a fascinating way to break it down. Like that really put things in perspective for me.
Yeah.
The one thing I thought was interesting was like the third step is, or the third status is this reintegration, or the first step is when people are stepping outside of their bubble, and then the second step is I'm confused, what's happening, I don't understand what's going on, this is all new to me, what is going on, they can freak out. It's very interesting that the third status is to freak out and revert to and you have a defense mechanism, and you become angry and guilty and embarrassed, and it's these really these negative emotions. You would think that one would think that it would move in somewhat a linear way where where you become more aware and more understanding, but it's interesting it kind of went back to being angry and blaming and
I liked her for lack of a better word, her nicknames for them.
Right.
Like how
from the video.
Contact is happy, racist,
Yeah.
And then the one we're talking about, the just ordinary racism as we think, I guess, or as what I think of when I think of racism, the blatant intolerance, and then white liberal, caked crusader is pretty creative. And I didn't write one down for autonomy. I don't know if she had one for that. But that helps me oh yeah, that's what that one's called. That's what that one is.
Yeah, she explained it really well.
Yeah,
that was interesting. And then the one with just the contact one, how people are oblivious to racism.
Yes.
Yeah, they have minimal experience with, African American people, and I'm trying to read my notes and everything. May profess to be colorblind as well. Yeah, which is really interesting because I think that's an easy way out for a lot of people who feel comfortable around the topic. It's just to say, oh, well, racism doesn't exist anymore, or no, it's not as bad as it used to be, or things are getting better, or I don't see color.
I don't think of things in that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of
course, they don't need to,
She she approached some of those on her video where she was giving her speech to the group, and then she shared that the video within her video was very difficult to watch, but it was all young people. So like that kind of, but yeah, that colorblindedness. There's a lot of people who say that, you know, post a cute little picture of 2-3-year-olds playing, like, oh look, you know.
You know, the interesting,
like
tying into what you're talking about, kids, is like they're talking about how this whiteness develops and how, you know, just this bubble is created, and it's like at a very young age, they said like 5 or 6 years old, where kids start to see what's going on around them and how there's a difference between the difference. They notice the difference, and their parents do nothing about it, or they say, oh, forget about that, don't worry about that. It's like seeing this and then totally ignoring it, and then they're like, okay, well, you know, that's the way it is, and I'm not gonna have to worry about that. That's what one of the readings said, how it all begins.
Right.
And how it's inevitable. In my class, like the white supremacy is, you know, sorry,
it's okay.
In one of the articles, just the inevitableness of it with our current state of how we're not teaching, you know, how teachers aren't focusing on their own white supremacy. It was interesting too. It made me think of the kids. Like, it's an inevitable part of everybody's life, whether for better, you know, like it or not. It is what it is.
Okay, I'm gonna kind of move on here. How can educators address whiteness and white identity development within predominantly white schools? I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that. This is kind of the next question.
I don't have any experience teaching white kids, so like
yeah,
I think
I'm in the same boat. I've only taught nothing but Asian children, so I don't know. We can keep. Yeah, go ahead.
I was trying to think last night when I was finishing up my readings. I was like, oh yeah, like I've been teaching for 16 years, but I think I've taught 3 white kids. So I'm really trying to adapt this to like in a practical way to curriculum development, which is also what I do for a living, and also and teaching in Singapore, which is a very it's a very upfront racialized society. They have, I don't know how much you know about Singapore law and Racial Harmony Day and their the laws that they've put into place to have a multicultural society and respect for religions and other races and culture. But I keep trying to bring it back, the theory, to my practical application and my experience. And I'm finding that to be a challenge because it's just not my experience teaching white kids, even though obviously, like with my background, it's not like, and my identity, it's not like it's a good idea to ignore whiteness and what that means for the children that I teach and all that. But I find this question quite challenging because of that. I think that it's more to do with, I think in my situation, if I want to think about it in a practical, applicable way, it's how do I ensure that I'm not just like mindlessly teaching children or enforcing racism or enforcing white supremacist ideas and thoughts and ideologies to the kids in my classroom and through the curriculum that I develop. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm hearing a lot. I might be going off topic. But,
yeah. And I would say also, it's just, you know, oh, I'm sorry, were you done?
No. Go on.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. You know, just having the conversation early on and not waiting, because as you were saying, like, you know, it starts at a very young age, 5 or 6 years old. So the sooner you have the conversation, I think is the better, because otherwise they're going to learn from what they see on TV. They're going to learn from what they hear from their friends, what they hear, you know, from other family members who may have, you know, poisonous, you know, ideals and thoughts that they're putting into those kids. So I'm just going back to read the question. So how can educators address whiteness and white identity development? I think, having that conversation early, doing some self-reflection, asking questions about what does it mean to be white? What is white supremacy? Giving them the definition, kind of going over the steps, kind of like we discussed today, asking them, what were you taught at home? What are your beliefs? And just kind of debunking some of those myths earlier on so they won't grow into something that, that student will then teach to others, that will then spread like wildfire. So I think that's one of the ways, it can happen with educators at a young age with our students.
I want us to remember this point, because when we're discussing those case studies, this is very much applicative to this, because I want to kind of connect back to this, because that's exactly their problem, is that they're kind of in this bubble and they don't know how to get out of it. I'm going to move along here unless anybody wants to add anything else to that. No? Okay. What are ways that teachers can engage in discussions on whiteness that will support the classroom space and having race-based relations? So this was, I think, kind of tied into there was one of the first papers we read was about a teacher who has taught these kind of like a history of the class was history of racism class, and having all these white teachers together and having to self-reflect and how to make it like conducive for them to kind of move along. I don't know how to say it, or how to like progress. So I don't know if you guys had any thoughts, or if you guys remember what you talked about in the paper.
Your phone is kind of, your line is kind of breaking up a little bit, Patrick.
Too well? Oh, I'm sorry. It just reminded me of the paper written by the teacher, the professor, teaching history of racism classes, and how to support, how to make it a good environment for a class like that to be held. I don't know if that makes sense to you guys, but
I think and making it a safe space too. A lot of times, things that we've been taught or that we've heard, if you say something and it sounds like stupid or silly and people judge you or laugh, but just making it a safe space where it's not funny, because this is what they heard, and just having that conversation like you said, and just making everyone feel comfortable regardless of your background too. So if there's a room full of kids and there's only 2 white kids and 5 black kids, making it to where the black kids are not saying anything negative about the white kids or vice versa. And I think it also could be in reverse too. A lot of the times that wasn't discussed in the readings, but there's a lot of things that African Americans have heard about whites that they can say that could be very offensive as well. So I just think creating that safe space is very important.
I think having along the same lines, having a standard of, if someone says, shares their experiences of prejudice and discrimination, that no one can say, well, that didn't happen, or you're analyzing it the wrong way, you're being sensitive, kind of having, which is a safe space, but just like a general rule of not discounting other people's accounts of what's happening, because that's gonna end it right there. And then exploring the whiteness and how it's affecting everybody. I really like the digital stories thing. I don't know how you can do that with young children, but and doing a survey, a self-survey of where do you think you are at the beginning of this course, and then at the end of the course for children, where, for age appropriate, do some self-examination of where do you think you are now, and why is it important.
Yeah, I think that social emotional learning development is really essential here, and that even though it can be defined in different ways in different countries, but I think that ensuring that the SEL is incorporated into the curriculum of schools and also in the training of teachers in a very very obvious way, like a metacognitive way, where children know what they're learning, the teachers know what they're teaching, the parents know what the kids are learning when it comes to social emotional development, that it's not a hidden curriculum anymore. That children, they go to school, they do their lesson, yeah, they learn English and math and all that, but they also are very aware that they discussed relationship management. And what did they learn about relationship management? Because even at, we all know, like we probably all know that even at 5 years old, to an extent, children can articulate, what they've learned emotionally and socially about relationships, or say about empathy, or sharing, or all of these things, that these skills that can be built on from a very young age, that need to continue to be built on all the way through secondary school. And that it should be, in my opinion, it should be taught in a very explicit way. I think that this can also help support like a non-bullying, safer space in the classroom, but also can help support like anti-racist education, multicultural education.
One interesting thing that, just kind of add a little bit on to what you're saying, one interesting thing that the teacher, that one professor in the history of racism course that in the paper is that, like they call them zaps or zips, I forget what they call them, but like little jokes. Little jokes like that, and it's a defense mechanism that people will make in certain uncomfortable situations. I'm speaking, for, and they'll use a kind of sense of humor to kind of get themselves out of a situation. They'll joke about race in a certain way, and the teacher says we're absolutely not going to be joking about that, and because it just, I don't remember it was just not something that she wanted to do in that class, because it just it wasn't important to that. There's another way out of being uncomfortable, and kind of adding in, there's other teachers that, so I don't know what else to say, but I just thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah, it was a good rule. Having those classroom ground rules that everyone follows.
Okay, I'm gonna here's the last question here, and then we'll kind of end the video here, end this video here. What are future considerations for teachers who are enacting white supremacy in their classrooms? And what steps can teachers take to move the field forward? I didn't know how to answer this one, actually, when I was reviewing this before we started, but any thoughts about this one, you guys? Future considerations for teachers.
Enacting.
See, here's the thing, is that if someone is enacting white supremacy in their classroom, they have no idea they're doing that. So, you know what I mean? Like,
well, we hope.
Right. I mean, they might be the point is they might be oblivious, and they would. And if you're totally oblivious, then talking about future considerations and how to move the field forward, I think they would have they just wouldn't consider that unless they were forced to in some way, whether they had to change jobs and teach more diverse students, or someone confronted them about that.
I was thinking the same thing too. I was like, how do you answer this, especially when it says enacting? But I think one of the things, I guess, beforehand, maybe the teachers can be trained,
right?
So that way that they aren't enacting or enforcing or what have you this in the classroom. So maybe prior to going into the classroom, they can be taught something, trained on it, and then maybe observed to see how they're doing in the classroom. That's just one of the ideas that I had.
Right.
I like the observed idea. Sorry, Sarah.
That's okay.
And I was thinking back, I was thinking of my schooling, and I think some of my teachers would throw a fit if they had to even think about examining themselves, which obviously is a huge problem in the first place. But I think, like you said, just making it a part of the program, making it a part of the professional development, making it a part of the courses to get your licensure, and like having a position like either school or HR somewhere of observation of the teacher for such things, and that they're you go. No, you're.
Oh no, sorry, I was interrupting because I'm excited to talk. Sorry. I just wholeheartedly agree about the professional development and the continuation of professional development. I think one of the things that's expressed in these articles and the studies was that, okay, so we have all these teachers go through this, what was it, responsive teaching, culturally responsive teaching. Okay, so they've gone through the training. excuse my language, I can't say that, but they're messing up in class, right? So they've gone through the training, they've got the good mark, but then when they get to the classroom, it's not actually transferring that knowledge that they learned. So I think that continuation of professional development is important, and it needs to be prioritized, because from my personal viewpoint, I think that like I was talking about social emotional development before, like I think that this, like the hidden curriculum is as important or more important than how well they score on an English exam or mathematics. So our teachers, I think globally, there's more and more emphasis on test results, and we're monitoring all of those standards in different ways. But the teachers should also be monitored on how they are doing in teaching the hidden curriculum, and how they are helping develop children socially, and certainly not, how are they not harming the kids.
Do you think it's teachers should be evaluated on themselves as well, almost through like and I don't know how I feel about this, but like through through reflection, they should have to journal a reflection or something as to like their journey of their awareness of white supremacy, and then because I don't know if this is my naivety, but I think this is hard to learn about and still stay where you are. Like I think that would take a really I don't know how people can learn about this and then stay stagnant in it. Maybe people can, but just if that should be just a part of, if you're working with all these children, and that not only teaching to them but for yourself. And
I agree with you. It's just not a one time is gonna fix everything. It's an ongoing process. Right. It's a life learning process.
Yes.
So in some may never change, right? They can put on a front in the classroom. So I agree with you, almost like in some type of reflection, or it's almost like they need to meet with a psychologist or something. It's like, how do you do this, right? How do you literally change your mindset, especially when you're an adult? Like as a teacher, you're an adult. So you've been set in your ways for so long. Change is hard for anyone. So I agree. Yeah, I think it's a process, an ongoing process.
There was an article, I don't remember if anyone can help, about the the counseling.
The psychology.
It was a more difficult one of the ones for me to read, as far as this it's pretty academic. But I was like, wow. I don't know the name of that one.
Was it maybe when multicultural education is not enough? Way now.
I think it was in the beginning.
Yeah, that was module 2.
And one of the first ones.
Yeah, one of the first ones.
Yeah, I'm getting mixed up with some of the information. I mean, I guess that's what you're supposed to do, is you're supposed to synthesize it in your own brain and experience and all that, but I get all the articles mixed up together now.
There's a lot. There's a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think this might be a good time. This is kind of our last question. If there's anything anybody else wants to add, I'm going to stop the video here, and we can move on to the next part. I'm going to stop, and this is kind of the moment of truth here. Personally, I want to make